Nancy Pelosi has had months and months and months to bring this thing to the floor. September 30th, that's when you all go on recess. You got a little over 2 weeks. Is there any chance Speaker Pelosi brings this thing to a vote? You can't blame Republicans on this one.
I can't believe I'm saying this, but Stephanie Ruhle is speaking truth. And that was a conversation specifically about legislation that is meant to ban members of Congress from trading individual stocks. And this is an issue that is near and dear to my heart because while we certainly do talk a lot about how money in politics corrupts our politicians and makes them even more disconnected from the constituents they were elected to serve, the issue with them also profiting off of the very companies that they should be regulating is a huge issue that we need to address. And there's been a lot of backlash toward reports that members of Congress have been trading individual stocks that they have been weighing in on legislatively. So there are conflicts of interest there. And I also think that there is some insider trading going on. So there's been backlash in regard to that as well. Now, Stephanie Ruhle was speaking to a Democratic representative, a congresswoman by the name of Abigail Spanberger. And I think it's important to hear what she has to say in response to the question and statement from Ruhle. Hey, you guys are in charge. You guys going to do something about this? You can't blame Republicans. Here's what Abigail Spanberger had to say.
If the speaker wanted to bring it for a vote this week or this month, she certainly could. And so we've seen kind of stall tactics along the way. There was going to be a committee hearing. There was going to be additional legislation introduced. We haven't seen that. The House Administration Committee was going to take action. We haven't seen that. It's very straightforward. There are many industries, many places, many journalists who, in fact, can't buy or sell individual stocks because of the potential conflict of interest, depending upon the subject matter that they cover.
Yeah, and let me be clear, it's not a potential conflict of interest. It is a conflict of interest. As a legislator, it is your job to ensure that corporations aren't being abusive to their workers. You're supposed to keep your constituents, the American people, safe from exploitative behaviors from corporations. Like, that's part of the job. And it's really difficult to do that when the reason why these employers, the reason why these companies and corporations are as abusive as they are to their employers is because they're always looking to cut costs associated with labor to do what? Maximize profits. And they maximize the profits for their shareholders. They literally have a fiduciary responsibility to do just that. And so if you have members of Congress invested in individual stocks, they're going to want to protect that profit motive. They're going to want to protect an employer's ability to maximize profits. It is a massive conflict of interest. And let me be clear about something else. Look, I would like to see the House pass legislation that would ban members of Congress, their spouses, and their staffers from trading individual stocks. Now, do I think it's going to happen? No, I don't think it's going to happen. Maybe the House will pass something. There's a Senate version of the bill in the works as we speak. But does anyone really think that there's any possibility that this kind of legislation would pass in the Senate, considering the filibuster? So unless we do something about that legislative filibuster that requires 60 senators to vote in favor of something in order for it to pass, we're never going to get legislation like this through Congress, period. That is the reality of the situation. So when you see Democratic politicians boast about how they're introducing this legislation, it's really important to understand that it's really nothing more than a little PR stunt. Because you got to focus on the first order of business. And the first order of business is, okay, what are the obstacles in the way when it comes to attempting to pass this legislation? So I want to go to Nancy Pelosi now, because if you can recall, Nancy Pelosi, in the very beginning of this whole debate, was very dismissive of the idea that members of Congress should be banned from trading individual stocks. In fact, she was asked about it during a press conference, and here's how she handled it.
Insider just completed a 5-month investigation finding that 49 members of Congress and 182 senior congressional staffers have violated the Stock Act, the insider trading law. I'm wondering if you have any reaction to that, and secondly, should members of Congress and their spouses be banned from trading individual stocks while serving in Congress?
No, I don't know to the second one. We have a responsibility to report in the stock, on the stock, but I'm not familiar with that 5-month review, but if people aren't reporting, they should be. Because this is a free market and we're a free market economy. They should be able to participate in that.
Yeah, we're a free market economy, so we should be able to participate in massive conflicts of interest by personally investing in individual stocks that would, of course, corrupt us and lead us to pursue our own personal financial, priorities over the best interests of the people who elected us into office. So, that was an abysmal, terrible response. But then she changed, right? All of a sudden, her rhetoric softened when it came to this issue. And she said that she was far more open to the idea of passing such legislation in the House, although that legislation hasn't been introduced, it hasn't been debated, it hasn't been voted on. What gives? Well, Pelosi was asked about that today, and here's what she had to say about it.
Just because somebody introduces a bill doesn't mean it becomes the law of the land. There's been discussion about it, and just recently this morning, actually, the committee, we've been going back and forth, and they were refining things and talking to members about what they think will work, and we believe we have a product that we can bring to the floor this month.
Okay, so a lot of excuses there, but her rhetoric has softened on the issue, and I would, this is my opinion, I would venture to say that the reason why her rhetoric has softened is because A, she got a lot of backlash after she said, it's the free market, we should be able to participate. And B, she knows that this is not ever going to pass unless something happens with the legislative filibuster in the Senate. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Senate is working on its own version of this legislation, which is unlikely to pass because there's no way 60 senators would vote in favor of it. But to further prove my point that Nancy Pelosi isn't really serious about wanting to pass this kind of legislation, she called on Representative Lofgren, of course, another Democrat, to essentially reconcile the Senate version of the bill and the House version of the bill. And if you look at the stock activity of Lofgren and her husband, conflicts of interest. Not the person that I would put in charge in making sure that, we reconcile both versions of the bill and get something passed. And it's because I don't think they're serious about getting anything passed. Now, I do want to get into an investigation, a good investigation actually, done by the New York Times on this issue. And I love this kind of data because it just shows you how corrupt Congress has become. And again, it goes beyond money in politics. It goes beyond campaign donors. You also have to focus on their own personal financial interests, right? So let's take a look at the first graphic here because they looked at stock trades between 2019 and 2021. And they found that from 2019 to 2021, 183 current senators or representatives reported a trade of a stock or another financial asset by themselves or an immediate family member, meaning their spouse or their dependent children, right? Or not dependent children, just their children who live with them. It doesn't even have to be someone they cite as a dependent. But if you break it down further, the New York Times found that more than half of those members of Congress sat on congressional committees that potentially gave them insight into the companies whose shares they reported buying or selling. And again, this is analysis by the New York Times. So that's 97, okay? Almost 100 current senators or representatives who have reported trades of individual stocks, either by themselves or members of their immediate family, that intersected with the work that they do in the committees that they serve. So going back to Abigail Spanberger and it might give the appearance of a conflict of interest. No, it is a conflict of interest. It's a massive conflict of interest. And I want to provide specific examples of that, okay? So over the 3-year period that the New York Times looked at, more than 3,700 trades reported by lawmakers from both parties posed potential conflicts between their public responsibilities and private finances. So let's go ahead and look at their trades. Let's look at their trades, okay? And by the way, this is a bipartisan issue, okay? This is not a let's attack Democrats, let's attack Republicans. It's a let's attack all of them because they're all doing it kind of situation, okay? So Representative Alan Lowenthal's wife disclosed that she had sold Boeing shares on March 5th of 2020, which was, conveniently one day before a House committee on which he sits released damaging findings on the company's handling of its 737 MAX jet, which was, of course, involved in 2 fatal crashes. Yeah, I don't know. Timing seems a little shady here. Could there be, number one, of course, conflict of interest, but also insider trading, which if we were accused of insider trading, we would be prosecuted. Okay, and it wouldn't be by a Senate ethics committee or a House ethics committee. It would be by, the Federal Trade Commission. They would be investigating to see if there was any insider trading happening. Even if you're a celebrity like Martha Stewart, you engage in insider trading, you will be prosecuted and you will spend time in prison. In this case, you have the leaders of this country, the people making decisions about critical legislation, potentially engaging in insider trading and just kind of getting away with it because they get cleared by ethics committees. Not interested. It's like the same thing that you see with police departments or specific cops who have been accused of excessive force, getting investigated through an internal group of people, an internal investigation. I'm not interested in an internal investigation. I'm interested in a real investigation to see if there's criminality here, if there's insider trading going on. Let me continue. Dr. Deborah Malumid, the wife of Lowenthal, the Democratic lawmaker Alan Lowenthal, bought or sold Sunrun, which installs solar energy systems in homes, on 97 occasions during a years-long period. During that time, Sunrun shares experienced 2 rallies, one that began late in 2019 and extended into early 2020. Keep this timing in mind, it's important. And a second, much bigger one after a market-wide rout caused by the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic in March, okay? Now, in 2020, Lowenthal got real busy, okay? Promoting what? Renewable energy. So in 2020, Lowenthal, a member of the House Committee on Natural Resources and the chairman of an energy-related subcommittee, was part of a bipartisan group that pushed for the inclusion of renewable energy companies in pandemic relief measures. Many of the protocols eventually passed last month as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. And guess what? That, of course, is going to mean, especially if you're invested in renewable energy companies like Sunrun, you're going to profit off of it because the government has just passed policies that prioritize renewables, including solar energy, wind, and in this case, companies that Lowenthal's wife had invested in. Now, in June of 2020, he also co-sponsored a bill to provide tax incentives for using renewable energy, but that never received a vote. Now, Sunrun shares began rallying about that time. By October, they had reached what at the time was a company high of $80 per share. They cost only $9 per share when Lowenthal's wife bought those shares earlier that year. So you can understand how much of a profit they made. But again, it's not just Democrats. Republicans are involved in this shady activity as well. Representative Mike Kelly's wife, Victoria Kelly, bought $15,000 to $50,000 worth of stock in the mining company Cleveland Cliffs, just one day after Representative Kelly's office learned that the Commerce Department would initiate a tariff investigation that might benefit the company. Representative Kelly had lobbied Trump's administration officials for additional tariff protections, according to an ethics office report. Kelly's purchase was the only trade she made in an individual stock that year, records suggest. She took a nearly 300% profit when she sold 8 months later. No, I'm sure it's totally innocent. I'm sure there was nothing wrong with those stock trades. I'm sure it had nothing to do with insider information that obviously we're not privy to. I'm sure it had nothing to do with the fact that, we're talking about an individual who gets to weigh in on policies that have impacts on the companies that he's invested in, his wife is invested in. So look, it's a necessity. It's incredibly important to pass this legislation, but we also need to be real about whether it's going to pass, how it would pass. And any Democrat who purports to be in favor of passing this legislation, but fails to address the very real problem of that legislative filibuster in the Senate is full of it. Again, it's nothing more than personal marketing for their campaign purposes and nothing more. I would like to see an actual fight to get that corruption out of Congress. And so far, haven't seen much of that.